Ethan Cross had been working salvage operations in the Outer Rim for 7 years, and he'd learned that the key to survival was knowing which contracts to accept and which to avoid. High-risk, high-reward jobs were tempting, but the ones that got you killed usually paid the best because they were suicide missions dressed up as opportunity. The Kepler-7 contract seemed straightforward. Retrieve valuable technology from a Valkyrie research station before it was deliberately destroyed. Standard protocol for facilities studying sensitive research. Extract what's worth preserving, then destroy the entire structure to prevent the technology from falling into rival hands. The pay was excellent. The timeline was tight, 3 days to complete salvage before automated destruction systems activated. But Ethan had successfully completed similar contracts before, working fast in hostile environments and getting out before things exploded around him. He docked his ship, the Wanderer, with the facility's main airlock, run his standard security sweeps, and verified the facility was on minimal life support with power systems failing in sections. According to his contract briefing, the station had been fully evacuated 2 weeks prior. All personnel returned to Valkyrie space, leaving only the automated systems and the technology he was contracted to retrieve. Except within the first hour of working, Ethan heard something that shouldn't have been there. Voices, speaking in what his translator software identified as distressed Valkyrie, coming from sealed sections in the facility's lower levels. He investigated cautiously. Unexpected sounds in supposedly abandoned stations usually meant structural failures or malfunctioning equipment, not people. But the voices continued, becoming clearer as he approached a section marked on his schematics as Research Lab 7, sealed. Ethan accessed the door controls, but they were locked with security protocols above his clearance level. He could hear the voices more clearly now, definitely people, definitely distressed, speaking rapidly in Valkyrie. He used his external comm system. "This is salvage operator Ethan Cross. Is someone in there?" The voices went silent. Then, after a long pause, "You're human." The question came in accented but functional English. Female voice, uncertain, carrying hope and fear simultaneously. "Yes, I'm contracted to retrieve technology before this facility is destroyed. Who are you and why are you sealed in there?" Another pause, then, "We need your help, please. They sealed us here to die when the facility is destroyed. You're the only one who can open these doors from outside. Please." Ethan's immediate instinct was caution. People trapped in sealed sections could be there for legitimate security reasons, could be dangerous prisoners rather than innocent victims, could be lying about their circumstances to manipulate him into doing something stupid. "I need more information before I override security protocols. Who are you? Why were you sealed in? Why wasn't this facility confirmed empty before destruction was authorized?" "We're researchers. We discovered something in our dimensional boundary studies that certain authorities wanted suppressed. Rather than allowing us to publish findings or continue research independently, we were declared security risks and sealed in the facility. Official story is we evacuated with everyone else. Our deaths will be classified as tragic accident when the facility is destroyed." The voice was calm despite the desperate circumstances, delivering information with the precision of someone who knew she had limited time to make her case convincingly. "Why should I believe you?" Ethan asked. "You could be legitimate security threats. You could be lying about why you're detained. I could get killed or blacklisted from ever working again for helping people who are actually dangerous. We have no way to prove our innocence to you." The voice acknowledged the problem honestly. "We were declared threats through closed proceedings we weren't allowed to attend. By Imperial law, we are expendable. But we are researchers, not terrorists. We discovered something about dimensional boundaries that contradicts official doctrine, and rather than allowing scientific debate, we were silenced." She paused, and when she continued, her voice carried the weight of someone making final plea. If you leave us here, we die when the facility is destroyed. If you help us escape, you risk Imperial displeasure. We can offer you nothing except our word that we don't deserve this execution. But you're human. Humans are known for unpredictability, for making choices based on conscience rather than strict adherence to authority. We're gambling that human moral courage will override human self-preservation. Ethan stood outside the sealed section, weighing the decision. Follow his contract, complete the salvage work, leave before the facility exploded, collect his payment, and never know whether 4 women died because he chose self-preservation over helping strangers. Or risk everything, his contract, his reputation, potential criminal charges, to help people he had no way of verifying weren't actually dangerous. He accessed the facility's security systems, pulling up whatever information he could find about this section. What he found suggested the women's story was plausible, or at least a version of it. The detention area was makeshift, research quarters that had been sealed and had life support reduced to minimal levels rather than a purpose-built prison. Security locks were coded to Imperial military protocols rather than research station security, suggesting outside intervention rather than internal procedures. The facility's official manifest listed these sections as cleared and sealed, with no mention of personnel remaining. Someone had gone to significant effort to ensure these women would be here when the facility was destroyed, while making it appear like an empty building being demolished. "I'm going to regret this," Ethan muttered to himself. Then, louder through the door, "I'll help you, but understand that I'm risking my life and my future on your word that you're not actually threats. If you're lying, if you are dangerous, I'll have destroyed myself for nothing. We understand, and we are grateful beyond what words can express." The relief in the voice was palpable. "What do you need from us?" "Time and cooperation. These security protocols aren't something I can just override. I'll need to work around them, and that's going to take hours we don't have much of. Stay calm, conserve your air, and be ready to move fast when I get these doors open." Over the next 6 hours, Ethan worked on the problem methodically. He couldn't override the security protocols directly. They required authorization he didn't have. But he could access the facility's failing power distribution systems. If he cut power to the detention area completely, the magnetic seals would fail, and the doors could be manually forced open. The risk was that cutting power meant cutting life support, and if something went wrong with the manual override, the women would suffocate before he could restore systems. When he explained the plan through the door, the response was immediate. "We accept the risk. Death from suffocation while attempting escape is preferable to waiting for the facility to explode around us." Ethan rerouted power systems, disabled the security protocols without triggering alerts that would notify Imperial authorities monitoring the facility's final days, and prepared manual overrides for the detention area doors. When he finally cut power to the section, there were 15 minutes of tension while he and the women, working from opposite sides, manually forced the magnetic seals and pried open the heavy doors. They succeeded with 7 minutes of air remaining. 4 Velkari women emerged from the sealed section, tall, physically imposing by human standards, with the distinctive pointed ears and deep purple skin of their species. But they were clearly researchers rather than warriors, their clothing practical rather than military, their bearing academic rather than aggressive. The one who'd been speaking English stepped forward. "I'm Lyra. These are Kara, Thalen, and Sareth. Thank you for saving our lives. We owe you a debt we cannot repay. Thank me after we're off this facility and far enough away that its destruction doesn't kill us anyway," Ethan replied. "We're not safe yet. Come on." He led them through corridors he'd mapped during his salvage work, navigating around sections that were too damaged to traverse safely, moving as quickly as the women's exhaustion would allow. They were alive, but they were far from safe. And Ethan had just committed himself to helping 4 strangers escape from Imperial custody, with no idea what consequences that choice would bring. Getting to the Wanderer required navigating through a facility that was actively dying. Power fluctuations created darkness in some corridors, emergency lighting flickering in others. Structural integrity was compromised in multiple sections, and automated systems were behaving erratically as the destruction sequence prepared to activate. Ethan led the four women through the path he'd carefully mapped, avoiding areas where his sensors had detected dangerous instabilities. During the journey, Lyra provided more context about what had led to their imprisonment. We were studying dimensional boundary theory, the mathematical frameworks that govern the barriers between our universe and parallel dimensional spaces. It's abstract physics, purely theoretical work that shouldn't have threatened anyone. She paused as they navigated around a collapsed section of corridor. But our research suggested that dimensional boundaries are more permeable than official Imperial doctrine claims. That with sufficient energy and proper exotic matter manipulation, controlled dimensional transit might be possible. And that contradicts Imperial beliefs, Ethan asked, checking his scanner for the next safe route. It contradicts centuries of established doctrine. The Velkari Empire has specific beliefs about dimensional boundaries being absolute and impassable. It's fundamental to our physics, our philosophy, our understanding of reality. Our research suggested those boundaries are not absolute, that they can be crossed, manipulated, potentially traversed. So you were killed for discovering something inconvenient. We were killed for discovering something that would require the Empire to admit they've been wrong about fundamental physics for centuries. Easier to destroy the research, discredit the researchers, and maintain comfortable fictions. They reached a major junction, and Ethan consulted his scanner. We need to go through the main research atrium. It's structurally compromised, but it's the fastest route to my ship. Stay close, move quickly, and if I tell you to run, you run. The atrium was massive, 3 stories tall, lined with observation windows showing the spectacular nebula the facility orbited. But sections of the floor had collapsed, support beams were visibly stressed, and the whole space felt like it could fail catastrophically at any moment. They moved carefully along the remaining stable path, Ethan's scanner constantly updating as stresses shifted and new weak points developed. Halfway across, a support beam gave way with a sound like thunder, and part of the upper level collapsed, debris raining down around them. "Move!" Ethan shouted, and they ran, sprinting across unstable flooring while chunks of ceiling fell around them, barely making it to the far exit before a major section of the atrium floor collapsed behind them. "Everyone okay?" Ethan checked quickly. "Minor cuts and bruises, but nothing serious." "Good. My ship's docked 1 level up. Let's move before something else falls apart." They reached the Wanderer and boarded quickly. The ship was designed for solo operations, so accommodating 5 people was tight, but the women didn't complain about cramped conditions. They were alive and off the facility. Everything else was manageable. Ethan immediately began pre-flight procedures, calculating the safe distance they needed to reach before the facility's destruction sequence activated. Then his communications system alerted him to incoming transmission, Imperial military channel, demanding identification. "This is salvage operator Ethan Cross, working under contract 7 Alpha 9. I'm completing final equipment retrieval and will be departing within the hour." The response was immediate and unwelcome. "Negative, Cross. Your contract retrieval deadline expired 3 hours ago. You are ordered to depart immediately and report to the nearest Imperial station for debriefing on contract completion." 3 hours ago was when he'd been working to free the women. He'd blown his contract deadline to help them, and now Imperial authorities wanted him to report for debriefing where they'd discover he'd rescued people who were supposed to die. "Acknowledged," Ethan responded with forced calm. "Departing now." He cut the connection before they could issue additional orders, and immediately initiated departure sequence. "We have a problem," he told the women, his hands moving across controls as the Wanderer detached from the facility. Imperial military knows I missed my deadline. They're going to want explanations, and when they investigate, they'll discover I helped you escape. We can't go anywhere in Imperial space. You'll be recaptured, and I'll be charged with interfering with security protocols. Where can we go? Kara asked, her voice tight with stress. Neutral territories. Independent stations that don't enforce Imperial warrants. Places where your research might actually be valued rather than suppressed. Ethan's mind was already calculating routes and contacts. I know some people who might be interested in scientists with controversial findings. It won't be comfortable or particularly safe, but it's better than dying in an exploding facility or being recaptured. As the Wanderer accelerated away from Kepler 7, Ethan watched the facility recede in his viewports. In approximately 60 hours, it would explode spectacularly, destroying all evidence of the research conducted there, and all evidence that 4 women had been sealed inside to die. Except they weren't there anymore. They were aboard his ship, alive because one human had chosen to help rather than to follow orders that felt fundamentally wrong. "Thank you," Lyra said quietly, standing beside Ethan in the cockpit as he plotted their course. "You risked everything to help us. We are aware of the sacrifice you've made. I couldn't leave you there to die. It's not complicated. You needed help. I could provide it, so I did." That simplicity, that moral clarity, is why we gambled on asking a human for help. Most Velkari would have followed orders and left us to die because authority demanded it. You chose conscience over compliance. That's human moral courage we've heard about but rarely witnessed. Ethan didn't respond, focusing on navigation. He'd made his choice and he'd live with the consequences. Right now, those consequences involved getting 4 displaced researchers to safety and figuring out how to rebuild a career after burning his relationship with the Velkari Empire. But he'd made the right choice, and he'd do it again. Some things mattered more than contracts or career prospects, like refusing to let people die when you could save them. That seemed like a pretty straightforward principle, even if it had complicated his life significantly. The journey to neutral space took 5 days. 5 days of careful navigation, avoiding Imperial patrol routes, monitoring for pursuit, and trying to keep 4 displaced researchers from losing hope. During the journey, Ethan learned more about their research and about why they'd been so desperate when they'd begged for his help. Humans have complicated reputation among Velkari, Lyra explained during a conversation in the Wanderer's small common area. You're seen as unpredictable, often aggressive, difficult to control through normal social hierarchies. That makes you dangerous by our standards, beings who don't reliably follow authority, who make decisions based on individual conscience rather than collective mandate. But you still ask me for help. Because those same qualities, unpredictability, independence, resistance to authority, also meant you might actually help us when any Velkari would have followed orders and left us to die. We gambled that human moral courage would override human self-preservation, that you choose to help strangers rather than prioritizing your contract and your safety. That's a hell of a gamble. Yes, but we were dying regardless. Gambling on human unpredictability was our only option. She paused. What we didn't expect was how straightforward your decision would be. You evaluated the situation, concluded we were telling the truth, and helped us. No elaborate moral philosophy, no lengthy deliberation. Just practical assessment followed by action. You made a good case. The evidence suggested you were telling the truth, and leaving people to die when I could help felt wrong. Wasn't really complicated. That simplicity, that moral clarity is what we gambled on, and it saved our lives. On the 4th day of travel, they encountered an Imperial patrol. Ethan provided falsified credentials, one of several backup identities he maintained for situations where his actual identity would be problematic, and claimed to be an independent trader. The patrol scanned his ship. Ethan held his breath, hoping the shielded cargo areas where the women were hiding would prevent detection of Velkari life signs. The scan passed without incident. The patrol moved on. "Too close," Sareth observed once they were clear. "Are we putting you in more danger than you expected?" "Yes, but I committed to helping you escape, not just to getting you off the facility. We see this through to somewhere you're actually safe." On the fifth day, they reached Meridian Station, a neutral territory in the border regions, beyond effective Imperial jurisdiction. The station had a reputation for harboring scientists whose research was too controversial for major powers to tolerate, and Ethan had contacts there who might value dimensional boundary work. He negotiated their arrival carefully, arranging for the women to be received by the station's scientific community, rather than by authorities who might decide that turning them over to Imperial forces was politically expedient. When they docked and the women were safely transferred to the station's protection, Lyra spoke to Ethan privately in the Wanderer's cargo bay. "You saved our lives. By Velkari custom, we owe you a debt that cannot be fully repaid. You gave us survival when we had none. You asked nothing in return except our word that we were worth saving. I don't need repayment. I just needed to know I didn't leave people to die when I could help them. That's what makes it profound. You helped because it was right, not because you expected reward. That's human moral courage that our species studies but rarely understands." She paused. "What will you do now? You can't return to Imperial space. They'll arrest you for interfering with security protocols." "I'll work independent contracts in neutral territories. Not as profitable as Imperial work, but safer given current circumstances. I'll manage. We want to offer you something. Our research, the dimensional boundary work that got us killed. We're going to continue it here, in an environment where controversial findings are valued rather than suppressed. If our work succeeds, if we develop practical applications, you'll have access to it. Not as payment, but as partnership with someone we trust. I'm a salvage operator, not a scientist." Dimensional manipulation technology could revolutionize space travel, resource extraction, countless applications. If our theories prove correct and we can develop practical implementations, having early access to that technology would be valuable. "Then I accept. Not because I expect profit, but because I'd rather see your work continue than see it destroyed, because it contradicted someone's comfortable beliefs." 2 years later, the dimensional boundary research Ethan had saved was producing results that attracted attention throughout neutral scientific communities. The research validated the frameworks that had gotten them declared security threats. Dimensional boundaries were more permeable than previously understood, and controlled dimensional transit appeared theoretically possible. The Velkari Empire, which had destroyed an entire research facility to suppress this work, now faced the reality that the research they'd tried to eliminate was being developed independently, and they'd lost their opportunity to control it. Ethan, working as an independent salvage operator in neutral territories, received regular updates from the research team. They'd named their primary theoretical framework the cross-transit theory, not because he'd contributed scientifically, but because his choice to help them survive had made their continued research possible. "We wanted the theory named after someone who embodied its principle," Lyra explained during one of their periodic calls. "Crossing boundaries that others claim are impassable. You crossed boundaries, professional, legal, moral, to help us survive. That's what our research is about." Years later, when practical dimensional manipulation technology began emerging from their research, Ethan received one of the first functional prototypes. "This exists because you chose to help rather than to obey," Lyra told him. "Because you refused to abandon people marked as expendable. Because one human's moral courage was stronger than an empire's desire to suppress truth." Ethan looked at the sophisticated device, at the technology that had emerged from research that nearly died in a destroyed facility. "I just didn't want to leave people to die when I could help. Didn't seem that complicated." That's what makes it remarkable. You saw people in desperate need, you had capability to help, and you helped. That simple moral courage, choosing to act when others would look away, that changed everything. The facility that was destroyed to suppress their research was gone, scattered across space. But the research itself survived, flourishing where controversial discoveries were valued rather than feared. All because one human heard four alien women beg, "Save us," and chose to risk everything rather than abandon them to die. Sometimes the difference between survival and oblivion is one person's choice to act when the galaxy looks away.